Hello? You hear me? It's live. It's live. It's live. We can start. Hey. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming along to this After the Pandemic Times Commonplace Rethink Glasgow talk. Really delighted to be here. I'm Fergus Bruce, I'm co-founder of After the Pandemic, joined on stage by Mike Saunders, who's CEO of Commonplace. He's travelled all the way up from sunny London to be here today. Thanks, Mike. And Dr. Abby Glenn, who is in several roles for One Planet Commonplace in Lateral North and After the Pandemic at the moment. She'll tell you a little bit more about that later on. What we're going to do is I'm going to just put After the Pandemic and our work with Commonplace in context. It won't take long. Then Mike's going to come up and tell us all about Rethink Glasgow and what the Glaswegians have actually been telling us on the heat map. And there's lots of interesting stuff in there. Then we're going to have a chat with Abby and think about what we can possibly do next with this information, with all these ideas, with all this creativity, how are we going to take it forward? And then if you want to ask any questions after that, you're more than welcome to do so. We have hot mics up here and can share them out with you. So After the Pandemic first, which is going to more information will appear. There we go. So After the Pandemic was founded in the first lockdown as an accelerator for change. We wanted to incubate ideas and to sort of enable communities to collaborate on creative projects that improve their cities and their spaces and their places. So the strapline is rethink, reimagine, redesign in the context of environment and cities and communities. We want people to rethink, reimagine and redesign their spaces and places to be greener, more resilient and more vibrant. We have sort of 5 core principles that this is led by: community, greenery, acting at a local level for global change, learning and growing, so education and growth, and designing forward, so infusing design thinking, as it's very broadly understood, in community action and creativity. Now, that covers a number of different things. The last 18 months have been pretty intense, and no more intense than the last 12, 11, however many days it is of COP. It's been a fun ride and very sustaining within what has been otherwise a very difficult period of time for everybody to have been connecting with communities and local people and working out that there's an incredible desire and creative resource in communities to change their own environments for the better. That's covered kind of cultural and art installations. We've done some interesting stuff over the last 18 months, reactivating vacant land and pairing up, for example, classical musicians with street artists and various other things of that nature. Educational toolkits. We have toolkits out there at the moment to help people, schools and young people, reimagine their spaces and places. Bits and pieces of research, and this is probably the first major piece of data gathering I think that we've done. So exciting to be doing that with Commonplace. And events, which we're all at now. So community engagement and outreach. So we've hosted this free, accessible and open 12-day sequence of events as part of COP, for which Anne Johnson, who you can't see on camera, is largely responsible, and we'll be taking a large break after this, I think. So, we come to Commonplace almost from the very beginning of After the Pandemic, or the mission that we started with. We were first concerned with vacant and derelict land in Glasgow, because everyone will remember during the first lockdown and all the lockdowns, you weren't allowed to move very far. You were stuck in your house, and you were restricted to maybe a few kilometers a day of walking, which meant that you got to experience and perhaps covet or dislike the area around you in a far more intense way, in a far more visually engaged way than you might do if you were just commuting through it to go to work, or if you were just going for a walk on any other day. Came to our awareness, both in facts and figures, which you can see there, and just in anecdotal knowledge of walking around the city. There's an awful lot of derelict and vacant land in Glasgow. So the first challenge we set out to the Glaswegians, anyone who wanted to communicate with us about it, was around vacant and derelict land. It was like, is there a piece of land, is there something near you that you think could be better, that could be co-opted to reimagined, rethought, redesigned to be greener, more sustainable and more vibrant? We got a huge response to that initial call, really overwhelming. Hundreds of people said, right, I really want to just do something. I really want to do something. I'm stuck in my house. I'm fed up with this piece of concrete. I'm fed up with the fact that there's not enough of this, or too few of these, or too much of this. And that really feeds into our principle of inclusive communities. So we wanted to bring those dialogues together, bring those people together so they could see what they all thought, rather than just sitting in their houses and in their bedrooms and in their home offices, feeling frustrated about it, and try and bring them together to try and fuse together their creative energy to create change, and then connect those individuals or groups of individuals with the mechanisms to make those changes. And that ultimately challenges took the challenge to the council and to the city itself. So Glasgow is known as the dear green place, but it could be an awful lot greener. Very much of it is fallow or derelict or brownfield, and a lot of that could be very easily turned into something that had a bit more community amenity about it, and was fed into the well-being economy and into people's well-being. And local for global. So you'll see these principles are already beginning to point at the sort of stuff that Commonplace does, which might give you a hint about why we're working together. But we wanted people to do things locally that could then be that were extensible to other communities around the world. So wherever you were in Bogota or Stuttgart or in Echelfecken and other sort of towns outside the main city centres, this would apply. You could do this with any piece of derelict land, or this idea would innovate to your community roughly wherever you are, with some adaptations. So but the key is we on the basis of an open call got 100 plus submissions. That gives you a sense that there's probably thousands of these out there. There's probably thousands of these ideas sitting gestating in people in their houses. And how do you get them? How do you get people to feel they are able to give those ideas to you, that you're open to them, that they will not be judged for not being a creative person or a designer? They'll just be taken on their merit, and it will give oxygen to the ones that we feel need the most help or have the most potential. So for global change, start local. So what could we do better than to pair up with Commonplace? Mike will tell you how Commonplace works and what an awesome platform it is, to try and generate as much local information as we can about what people want, what they want to see change, what their ideas are, what's the bit that they hate, what's the meta level citywide things they would want to see, what are the small, this is just my street and please stop this lamppost falling on my head, which is one of the comments. Where is it and what is it? And then we will decide and try and help those communities and organizations and individuals how we think we might be able to help afterwards, to try and actually execute on these ideas, rather than just leaving them unsaid and undone. So I think that brings me quite neatly onto Mike, who's going to present from his seat, and I'm going to go through his slides for him. So we're giving Mike a mic.
I'm a Mike squared.
It'll be the first time anyone's ever told that joke, ever. So it's a world premiere. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks so much, Fergus. And just to start with, what a pleasure it's been working with after the pandemic, and also with One Planet on this project, because the beauty of gathering large amounts of data about community is being able to see the outcomes of those ideas, and having an organization that's so ingrained and connected to the place, and be able to work right from the beginning with you guys has just made this project, it's created a vibrancy to it, on and offline, joining it all up, which is amazing. So if we could move on. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Commonplace itself, first of all, and then talk about the project itself. So our mission is to connect people to places, and to do that to enable positive change through participation. So we're very much interested in the outcome. We're not specifically interested in the kind of consultation or the engagement, although that's mainly what our technology does. What we're really interested in is what happens afterwards and the outcomes of those things. So I think what we've seen over the last kind of 18 months is a unique change happening. And that's been driven by a couple of things. Firstly, the pandemic, where we've seen communities just being an order of magnitude more connected with the place that they live, more interested in being involved, more interested in having a say. And the stats that you see there are a nationwide survey that we did in the middle of the pandemic, and we found that over 3/4 of the people wanted to have bigger influence, bigger connection to the place that they live. And then the second is around climate, and of course it's COP this week. And there was a recent survey done by Yale University that looked at Americans' attitudes to climate, with an incredible result that the majority of Americans now want to do something and do something actively. So if you pull all of that stuff together, there's a moment where we can really get change happening. So what Commonplace itself does is we've got a suite of tools. It's all mobile friendly, and it really does two things. It asks people to talk about their place, and they do that by putting ideas on a map, which you're going to see when we have a look at the RETHINK Glasagow map. And it also allows organizations, individuals to propose ideas and to get feedback on those ideas. And then it feeds all of that into a big kind of data machine. And I'm going to show you some of the outputs of that. That's kind of underpinned by an analytics engine. So within our platform, we allow all our customers, who tend to be local authorities and developers, to do a lot of the data analysis within Commonplace, and they can also download all of that data. And we're starting to use some kind of light touch AI as well. So, for example, using some language processing to pull together and categorize similar comments into one place, and you can do that dynamically in real time. Thanks, Berger, sorry. So, over the pandemic, I mentioned that we did a lot of work. We had about 75 councils, I think, around the UK who took advantage of the free offer that we made for councils to basically put out very, very quickly a Commonplace which allowed their communities to talk about emergency changes, talk about adaptations that were needed to happen fairly fast because of the pandemic. So, and we had about 500,000 responses to that around the UK, and you can see a little map there of where those happened. And that gave us a real feel for what's possible. And then we started to apply that in addition to our kind of bread and butter work, which is planning applications and planning policy development with local authorities. We started thinking about safer streets and women's and girls' safety, and we've done a project around that. And then, of course, climate, which we'd already started doing some work with some of the councils, which I'll talk about in a sec. So this is actually not any of those projects. This is a more sort of traditional, if you like, regeneration project. And I just wanted to talk about it because it kind of shows the full cycle of how this thing works. So Lewisham Council decided that Catford, which is in South East London, needed regeneration about 4 years ago. And what would normally happen in this kind of project is that they would appoint a master planner architect. The architect would go away and spend lots of time and money on creating this amazing looking master plan. And only at that point would they then bring it to the community and say, what do you think of this? And of course, by that point, it's quite hard to make any changes to it. So to their massive credit, Lewisham decided to do it the other way around and to actually ask the community what they thought about the place before employing a designer to come up with some ideas. So they ran a Commonplace in Catford for about 18 months before any design work was done at all. Very similar to the RETHINK Glasagow conversation that we've started. They started to see kind of themes and categories and different groups emerging in the ideas. And after about 18 months, they decided to use that data as a key piece of evidence to feed into the design brief. And we use quite a lot of infographics. So in the middle there, you can see the summary of what the community thought about various different things, prioritized. And one of the really important kind of middle assets in this journey that we find is creating this kind of shared understanding of what the community's priorities are. So playing back to them what they've said and prioritizing holistically what they've said and using that as a way of then feeding into the design process. So all of that data fed into the design brief. The designers then went away and did their job, and then the proposals that were based on this community data were then published on Commonplace, and people fed back and commented on that, which then went in to be approved. And some of those developments from the master plan are now starting to be delivered. But what also happened, which in some ways is more interesting, I think, is that there were some things that literally started flashing red on the map, so kind of hot spots of stuff that was going wrong. And one of those was Catford Station, which you can see on the bottom right there. And the accessibility of Catford Station was terrible, particularly for wheelchair users. The council said, well, we could wait till the big master plan happens and deal with it then. But actually, there's something that we could do right now at a relatively low cost. We can fix 80% of the problem, and people can start using it. So that's what they did. And they were then able to shout to the community about that by posting on the Commonplace newsfeed. So that created a really nice kind of circle of activity where people had talked about the place, we'd collected the data together and understood the kind of holistic needs of the community. That then fed into the design. But in the meantime, there was this much closer, tighter feedback loop where some changes had happened immediately. And I think the reason I wanted to show you that is I think that when we come to talk about what happens next, there will be different kind of timelines of cycles, hopefully, from this project. And I just wanted to show you one other project before we come on to Rethink Glasgow, which is a project we did across London called Park Power. I was going to call it Rethink Parks, but it's not, it's called Park Power. And this asked people to answer the question, what do you think of the future of your local park or green space? And we had thousands of ideas and comments and thoughts about green space in London. We mapped it all out and we did some kind of data clustering analysis to then come up with what we called parkologies, rather cheesily, which are different categories of parks and how parks are used. But simplifying the data into that kind of sort of categorization was actually very useful for the boroughs in London. They were able to take that and apply it to some of the policy development and some of the projects that they're developing. And that's another example of how in the good projects that we run, the data is able to drive thinking and rethinking on various different levels and at different speeds. So the climate conversations we've been doing for a little while, mainly with local councils. So as I'm sure many of you know, a lot of local councils have declared a climate emergency, and they're doing a lot of work around what that climate emergency means and looks like. And we've helped some of those who have created citizens' assemblies, which is a relatively small group of people who have been selected to do quite deep conversation analysis about the climate in this case. And Commonplace provides a kind of digital wrapper around that. So the deliberations of the Citizens' Assembly get sort of rippled out through Commonplace, and then the broader community can feed back in from those ripples back into the Citizens' Assembly. And we've also been involved in doing a lot of active travel, walking and cycling projects. The one that you can see there, which is our sort of kind of flagship for that, is with Waltham Forest. And again, this is a project that happened over a number of years. And I won't go into the long story of it, but at the end of the project, once it had actually been delivered and developed, the King's College in London did an analysis of the improvements to the air quality and found that 42,000 additional years of human life would be created just because of that one programme. And what we were able to do was to help the council to deliver it more quickly by providing this evidence base that helped them to get the political buy-in and the kind of momentum to make it happen. So Rethink Glasgow. I'm going to sort of throw some ideas out there at you and talk a bit about what we've found today. This is very much kind of live. So this is the beginning rather than the end of the conversation and the analysis. And so, what would be great to get back from you is your own thoughts. And indeed, I think on the next slide, Yeah, there we go. So if you scan that QR code, you will be able to get to the map that you're going to see in a few minutes, and you can actually navigate through and see all the comments yourselves, and you can add your own. So I'd love for you to add a few comments in. You know Glasgow well. You can see what other people have written. You can agree with those. You can put a pin on the map yourself. So please do that as we go through. We've got a fantastic opportunity tomorrow, which is to present this project in the green zone at COP. We were selected as one of 10 startups who in the tech space who are doing stuff around climate. And I'm going to be telling some of the stories that I'm telling you now tomorrow in the green zone. We've also, along with After the Pandemic, featured in the BBC World Service programme that aired yesterday called People Fixing the World, which is all about citizen action and people doing stuff from the ground up. So I think that was a really nice additional piece. So the Glasgow conversation has thrown up a huge number of interesting ideas and comments. There's 3 of them that you can see here, which the After the Pandemic team have delightfully captured in their graphics. So you can read through them. Some of them are about the infrastructure of the place, the kind of transport infrastructure. Some of them are about the feel of different neighborhoods. Some of them are about the way that derelict spaces can be reused. And some of them are about people's kind of sense of well-being and safety sometimes in different areas of the city. We've looked at them from a sort of top-down level, thinking about what type of things people are talking about. And it's really interesting when you look at it, because people have highlighted quite a lot of problems, but they've also come up with lots and lots of suggestions. And the suggestions are quite practical. Some of them are very, very small scale, things that, you know, individuals can do or small groups of people can do. Some of them are much larger, which require more investment. And although people have highlighted a lot of problems, there's a lot of empathy and a lot of pride about Glasgow and about the places that they've highlighted on the map. On the left, you can see the kind of density of comments, and as you'd expect, it's centered on the center of Glasgow. But we've got actually a lot of comments that come in various different neighborhoods around. And you can see to the south of the center, there's a big kind of heat spot, and also to the immediate east and sort of northwest. And then again, looking at the top down, the comments cover leisure, they cover travel, work, and education. A lot of people who are talking about education in the city, and some who are clearly students. Excuse me. So the other way of looking at it is from a kind of holistic point of view is what the topics people are talking about. Many of those there you'll probably not be surprised about. So sustainable transport, wildlife space, some really, really interesting ideas around wildlife space, supporting jobs, growing local food, living with more sustainable materials. Those are all things you might expect to see in a conversation about climate. The thing that's really interesting for me here is the top one is about community spirit. So the thing that the most people have talked about most frequently is about how they work together, and it's about how they connect with other people around place. And I think the energy that I see that can come out of this and can drive this forward all relates to that top thing. So that's fantastic to see. It really, really is fantastic to see. The other thing that we've done then is to look at the clusters of comments based around some of those themes. And you see a relatively similar pattern happening around different themes. The community spirit one is kind of probably most broadly spread. And then some of the ideas around, for example, growing local foods. We've got a smaller number, but we've got some really interesting clusters happening. So if you just go on to the next slide. So this is an example of one of the comments on the heat map. And I'm going to actually show you what it looks like live in a couple of minutes. This particular one's about university campus and about improving cyclability and walkability around the university campus. And there's a lot of other similar comments across the rest of the city. Just a couple of features I wanted to point out. In the bottom right-hand corner of the screen there, you see a little thumbs up. That's the ability to agree with somebody else's comment. So you can not only add your own comments, but you can agree with other people's comments. And that allows us to cluster the data in different ways and see what's bubbling up to the top in terms of popularity. So just to pick out a few clusters here. So there was one interesting sort of hotspot to the east of the sort of northeast of the centre, which registered particularly on the kind of community spirit, the enabling sustainable transport and better health. And this turned out to be an area around the Thornwood intersection, which is an area that's undergoing regeneration. There's a big road intersection. There's a new development which seemed to be somewhat unpopular, but there's a green space right next to it where there's an opportunity to actually do some really interesting planting. So kind of all of those things coming together, people coming at that particular location with different perspectives. Some of them cyclists, some of them lived locally, some of them saw it as an opportunity for kind of growing wild or rewilding that area. And all of that being kind of combined together to provide the opportunity in a particular location. And that's one that I hope the community might be able to pick up and run with. And the next one, please. Could you just click onto the, oh, there we go, sorry, yeah, thanks. So there's also an interesting hotspot to the east of the city centre around Dennistown and Belgrove. And this was where particularly there was a lot of sort of derelict or semi-derelict areas that people have made suggestions about. And so if you go on to the next one, yeah, so down in the Lauriston area, there's quite a lot of rail infrastructure and kind of disused semi-industrial spaces that some really interesting ideas came up from. And I think the next slide is actually one of those. So this was an idea about a stretch of railway inspired loosely by, there's a Parisian project called the Petite Ceinture, which is the little belt. And this seemed to be, for this person, an ideal opportunity. And you can do that kind of project at a very large scale, but you can actually also do it at a small scale to start with. It doesn't need to be a massive multi-million-pound investment. It can be done in much smaller blocks. So I think I might just jump into the map quickly and have a little scoot around, if that's okay, yeah, if sure. I can manage to work out how to do that.
Will be the opportunity to ask questions.
And any questions, thank you.
If you want, and please yell them out now while Mike is doing this, because we didn't rehearse this tech change beforehand. So
I was going to say that I live in Dennistoun, and I'm feeling really pleased that I've been represented.
Fantastic.
If you could pick up the mic when you talk.
But I'm not, I am switched on. Well, thank you, Stuart. Yeah, did I tell you that my sister lives in Catford as well? It's been a thorn in the side of the council, kind of runs in the family. But yeah, that's great. Yeah. They've made a huge change down there. It's fantastic.
They have. Yeah, it's really
all of her in-laws are wheelchair users, so it's been amazing. Yeah, it's really great.
So I think I'm sharing now. Is that right? Okay, good. So you can't see it up there, we can see it here. So I'm just going to scoot around the map. Is it going to come up on the? Okay,
Stuart's just working.
Fantastic.
Working feverishly behind the speakers here.
There we go.
There we go. Ta-da.
Fantastic. So this is what the map looks like, and I can click in to the map itself. It's an interactive map that I can scoot around. I can zoom in and out. And as you see, while I zoom in and out, the I've got a little bit of a lag here.
There's a wee
There
bit
we
of
go. The clusters uncluster as you zoom in, and then cluster again as you zoom out. And I can just, anybody can click on any of these comments. So one of the key ideas around this is that it's very, very accessible and open to anybody. And you can go and read every single one of the 1,200 odd comments you want, if you want, one by one, before you decide whether you want to add your own comment. So this is actually the interchange that I was talking about earlier, and you can see some of the comments here. This is the one with the green area I mentioned, with the ideas around rewilding. These are some of the ones in the Dennistown area. And there's a cluster that you can see kind of visually there. And then this is the railway one that I mentioned. And actually what I wanted to just play you, if it's going to work, is the clip from the radio program with the person who actually made this comment. So I'm hoping this is going to come through the audio. So
I can neither confirm or deny.
Let's cross our fingers and see what happens.
We're now looking at a disused railway bridge, and it was Leah who made a comment about this spot right here.
My name is Leah Bush, and I think we should turn your...
Should I do it with my volume down? Or?
There's an option in Zoom to share audio, I think.
Ah.
Mostly the share screen down the bottom left, might be a wee share audio tick box.
Oh, that sounds really.
So as we're doing that, I think Abby, you can
There we
speak
go.
to some lived experience of some of the Denniston comments.
Ooh,
Let's try that again. Oh, there I am.
you mute yours. There we go. That's fine, isn't it? Yeah, actually, a lot of people in this room are staying in Denniston at the moment. People
There
have
we
travelled
go.
up here, and it seems to be the way. So, I mean, the big one, the big chat, and this is a huge part of community spirit as well when you think about parks. There's one big park in Denniston called Alexandra Park, and throughout the pandemic there was a football pitch, like a big caged one, that was obviously not used for football because nobody was allowed to play football, and because of this, a lot of the dog walkers started using it as a run. And I have a rescue greyhound who likes to stretch his giant legs, and so I started using it as well, and it became this real place for meeting up, and I built a huge community around my dog purely using that space. And a lot of the other sort of dog friendly spaces are not actually dog safe and dog friendly, and now that demand, I suppose, for this space as a football pitch has just fallen away because nobody's used it for 18 months. The grass is really muddy and sort of ripped up. There's now this big movement, and it's been coming through the Commonplace map that a lot of people really want to have this officially made into a dog run. And I also can neither confirm nor deny that I've been spreading this message, and I hope to use.
Yeah,
But,
we'll
yeah.
take that as it's given. Let's try to see if we can try the audio with that now, Mike. Nope.
You definitely unmuted on Zoom. Try unclicking that one.
Oh, I need to be unmuted on Zoom.
Third time. Here we go. Yeah. It doesn't look like it wants to work, I don't think.
Should I just?
Sort of David Bowie labyrinth vibe. Like,
If my mic up there, is that going to work?
If you're muted, your mic itself is muted on Zoom, then it should, and your speakers are on, it should work. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll try and find the link on my laptop. So you keep talking, I'll try and find it somewhere else. I'm not gonna do it.
I don't think it's, yeah. Is there, oh, may have a help from the audience here.
The recording might be to some degree, but I was just wondering about how once the council start to, use the platform to, gather the information, and they start, doing actions in response to it, and how are they communicating that back to, who's raised it and anyone who's added comments, and
So
Is it on the chat or,
yeah, so just for the live stream, the question is how, if and when the ideas on the map are taken forward by the council and others, how is that communicated? But we use Commonplace to track progress. So it's almost back to your point about execution, Mike, is that you're interested in execution. Can people follow execution and feedback on execution in a live loop through Commonplace?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I just go to the news feed here on the website, so everybody who has contributed has the option to sign up to this, and the vast majority of them do. And each time we post a new update on this news feed, they get notified about it. So at the moment, this is mainly about this process and the beginning of the conversation, but you can see there's some feedback in terms of some of the comments that have been added. And what I might do, just to go back to the Catford example, is show you what this looks like when it's been live and running for some time. So you can see here that the news feed is being used for all sorts of stuff, including stuff that the council's doing, but also a lot of stuff around the community. Yeah, so actually the community stuff's a little bit further down, but this provides an opportunity for feedback to the community about what they've said, about how the place is developing, about the outcomes that have been built on the original feedback that they sought, and about other opportunities for them to participate. So it's really about trying to close that loop constantly, in a constant cycle of information coming back.
So you want to try one more time, Mike, and then
What time to start with?
1754, roughly.
Here we go. It is worth it. Don't worry, it's worth the wait.
We're now looking at a disused railway bridge, and it was Leah who made a comment about this spot right here.
My name is Leah Bush, and I think we should turn the old railway tracks into a community garden and walkway, like they've done in Paris with the Petite Ceinture. So if the old railway tracks are still structurally sound, I would be happy to lead on a community project to make the path more usable and enjoyable.
What a perfect example of someone wanting to make a difference as well and actively making a suggestion to lead this project.
Is it sort of down to Leah to follow that up?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, yeah. But, you know, hopefully it's mobilizing people to make that change.
Okay, so we've got one more spot in the city that I want to go and have a look at. It's about half hour.
Thank you. That was just a really a nice nugget, and it brings together, I think, what an individual can do, what an individual can do maybe with a broader group of people, and what the council can take from this for a bigger kind of infrastructure type project.
Awesome. Let's see if we can try this again.
There's also paper copies of this QR code just at the end of each row. If anybody wants to take some and disperse, that would be fab.
Okay, right, let's see if this works. This is a video.
I am Rachel Naismith. I'm 24 years old and I'm a product designer to trade. So I think that young people's voices really need to be heard and listened to rather than just kind of swished away to the sidelines, because we are the ones that are going to be affected by all this. And climate change, as we know, didn't happen overnight. It was caused by a series of events leading up to now, and we're in the state that we are. So change isn't going to be made overnight. We need to start to change now. But that's what we need the older generations to help us with, to collaborate with us for to actually change.
So that sort of leads us quite neatly into what's next. It's Rachel telling us what she thinks needs to happen. So we're developing and have developed this enormous set of data and intelligence about what the citizens of Glasgow would like. We have that clustered in certain parts of the city where there's a clear desire for certain interventions I think what Mike will say and Abby will say again about One Planet, a lot of those interventions are very achievable, for not very much in the way of budget or free. And I think the key thing is going to be connecting people like Rachel and people like community activists and organisers, and the people who've said they will help. Like, I will literally dig up the ground and plant the trees. There's plenty of those comments. How do we connect them with enablement? How do we facilitate and support them? So Mike, I don't know, you're going to say a few words on that before Abby picks up.
Yeah, I think so. In terms of the map and the conversation that started, we see this very much at the start. We've taken the opportunity of COP, to work with After the Pandemic and One Planet, and to get this conversation kicked off. But actually, it's just the beginning. And what we would love is that we use the foundation that's been built for the conversation to continue as it did in Catford and other places, and to build. And I don't think there's a kind of end point of that necessarily, but the more information, the more people who contribute, the more different kinds of people who contribute, the richer the idea set will become. And people will be able to pick up some of those ideas and connect themselves with other people who have similar ideas, start to build some momentum locally from the ground up, at the same time as getting the council to engage with the data and with the information, and to start to use that in their own thinking about their plans for the future of Glasgow. So I think what we're really interested now in is continuing to work with you guys and figure out collectively, how we make this into the legacy that I think we all want.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
For
so,
sure.
Abby, do you want to say a little bit about One
Yeah.
Planet's role in that?
Can do, absolutely. So as Fergus said at the beginning, I have my fingers in many pies as part of this project. So sort of based out of Lateral North, which runs After the Pandemic, is part of the founders of After the Pandemic, and I'm seconded generously to One Planet for this side of things. So I'll just give a little bit of background about One Planet briefly, and just kind of what it is, and then I can talk a little bit about how and why we all started working together. So as you can see on the screen here, so One Planet is essentially a piece of software that allows you to make these really engaging organic plans. And they're really designed to be very shareable, they're designed to be very transparent, and you can input data really easily into the platform through the use of spreadsheets, which is why when we have all of our comments and materials, I have an enormous Excel file of all the comments on the Commonplace map. I can upload that very neatly into this. So that's something that we're going to be doing over the next few weeks. And for me as well, and for the founder, the main point, I suppose, of One Planet is to show how everything is interconnected. And to help share stories, because you all know the phrase, science makes life and art makes life worth living. Well, I always think about data. I think, data builds these stories, but you really need somebody to tell them. Otherwise, it's just all sitting in a spreadsheet on your computer. So I've just built a map a few weeks ago. This is actually for the original site for After the Pandemic. We're just thinking about our KPIs and the legacy that we might want to build out of After the Pandemic. So as you can see here, they're in 3 categories. So you've got outcomes, actions, and indicators. So I could use an example for that map, but I'm just going to give it another one. So for an action, you might want to promote the links between good nutrition and mental health. Your outcome would be linked to one of the One Planet living principles, which are actually the basis for the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. So your outcome would be health and well-being. You can see that nice yellow smiley face up there. That's health and well-being. And your indicator might be something like educational classes being run, or attendance at those, or somebody starting to build a food forest and increasing the supply of fresh vegetables, for example, to the local community. So in terms of us all getting together, I'm hoping that One Planet will be a brilliant platform to use to put together, to spread and disseminate all of the ideas that we've got from this incredible community map with, yeah, you're right, well over 1,000 contributions, and actually show in a very neat and beautifully packaged way how many people are actually wanting the same things, and to stop people repeating different actions and empower them in a way to get together, to know that there are 10 people in Denniston who really, really want to make a dog park out of this old football pitch, and to bundle those together. And then, of course, I mean, Fergus, you'll be able to say a bit more about this, but to link up with after the pandemic and use, you know, our contacts, our ability to build community relationships, and also to work with, you know, build groups like the council to help facilitate, you know, these projects.
That's very true. I think we don't want to see any of these just sort of stay on the vine. There's too much good stuff there, and almost all of it is direct intervention that would help people's lives almost immediately if it was finished. And what's surprising again about a lot of it is that it's not expensive, it's not difficult. There are some very large ideas, like get rid of the entire M8, for which there is a huge movement in Glasgow at the moment. Just get it out in the middle of the city, or tunnelize it, or hide it, or, you know, turn it into a boulevard. Some fantastic stuff there. That's a larger infrastructure project which I don't think the community can do on their own, but there's loads of cascading all the way down from that scale down to I just want the lamppost, the pavement under the lamppost fixed so it doesn't fall on my head. Like that kind of day to day, I covet this or I dislike it because it's there. I think the energy is there, and I think where we see ourselves filling the gap is in linking those people, whether it's an individual or a group of individuals, or linking them together and showing them, look, your ideas are clustered around the same sort of thing. You all want the same sort of thing, but you're not talking to each other. Let's all talk, and then connecting them with enablement, whether that is straightforward funding, value in kind, our expertise, the expertise of people we work with, to try and make them happen, to try and make it actually happen, so that after the pandemic, the development continues and happens, and the kind of energy and determination that people have, based on having sat in sight for months, and all that creative energy is not doesn't fritter away. That it's directed towards things, and first locally, and then what we'll do after that is take what we've learned and try and spread it out around the country and around the world. So I think we're all talked out up here. So if you've got any questions, happy to take them. The lady in the front who looks awfully like Anne Johnson. Yeah.
So this is the first time I've seen it properly. I have gone on and looked at the map on my phone, but seeing it on the screen and stuff and seeing the one that just looks fab. And I think the main thing for me is, like, just as you were saying there, is the whole kind of, you know, when we first started doing this, in fact, not when we first started, it's happened all along, but right at the beginning, one of the questions that we got asked a lot was either who asked you to do this?
So either who asked you or who gave you permission to do after the pandemic, and we were like, well, no one, we're just doing it. We see a need and we're just going to do it. So we did. I mean, perhaps quite foolishly and recklessly, but we did. and we have ended up here with all this happening, but also there's been lots of other knock-on effects. Other projects are happening across the city that would not have happened or wouldn't have happened to the scale that they have if we hadn't done this. And I think that's probably, so Mike, I think if I've got a question, which is, given that you know, where you've done this before and where it's been going for longer, that ability to kind of bring community, you know, people together and then allow them the agency to actually do things, has that, you know, does that actually, have you seen real world effects where actually it helps the relationship between the citizenry and the council, and actually, you know, that you start to see a momentum building, and it's not just about the individual projects, that you get more, it amplifies everything and you get more overall because you've given them the tools to allow what might seem like fairly minor interventions initially, but you build up that momentum.
Yeah, so more than the sum of the parts. Yeah, I mean, one of the slightly frustrating things about doing this is that some of the outcomes take a long time to happen. So, you know, several years, sometimes even more. But we have. So I think, I mean, this they're kind of anecdotes rather than sort of data that I can draw out. But for example, in the example I talked about in Waltham Forest, one of the really interesting and pleasing things was that one of the outputs, one of the kind of things that the project delivered was lots of new small green spaces in Waltham Forest. And those green spaces need some community attention to make them continually work. And quite a large number of people who initially engaged online through Commonplace volunteered for the upkeep and the kind of planting in those physical spaces. And that's something that's continued and is growing in momentum. And that's something that kind of cycle of online, offline, I think is part of what can help that to work. So, what you're doing, and that, with 100 responses that you got by talking to people face to face, which is fantastic and really, really rich. And one of the things I always say is that the best way of engaging is, sitting down, having a cup of tea with somebody, because that's when you get the real kind of nuance and deep insight. But it takes a long time to have a cup of tea with 1,000 people. So, what we can do is do the 1,000 cups of tea at a large scale, but less deep. And we can then work with other organizations like you who can do the deep. And when you pull all of that together, you get this incredible mixture of a big data set that supports and the richness and the insight that actually allows that to be delivered on the ground.
I think you've just named our next campaign there. I'm like 1,000 cups of tea. I'm right up for that. I'm up for trying.
So I'm gonna come in with another kind of question or point, which is, there's a danger, isn't there, that when you do go out and you ask people their opinion, especially people who feel that they are not often asked and that they don't see action as quickly as they expect, that they become disillusioned and it becomes even harder the next time to engage with them. So what is it that, so, I mean, you kind of said there, obviously that's one of the examples of how, we've worked so well together, but do you think it relies on that? Like, how do we collectively avoid falling into that trap?
It's a really, really good question. This is one that comes up again and again. I think there's always going to be individuals who are disappointed because you can't satisfy everybody, right? So, some of the projects that we're involved in are very, very controversial, and they have half the community supporting them and half the community not wanting them to happen. Where I think something like Commonplace can really help is that, going back to this idea of a kind of shared understanding of priorities, if you have a lot of data and you can show that a lot of people have been involved, and you get this sense, we call it social proof, you get this sense that you're part of a big conversation that your neighbours and local businesses and so on are all part of. And then you see the priorities that collectively that group of people have made. Even if you disagree with those priorities, you're much more likely to buy into the fact that there's been a fair process and people have been heard, and probably to understand what the reasons behind those priorities were being made, and therefore to be part of the process. So I think that's one risk. The other risk is just inaction, which is that all of these brilliant ideas have been generated and then nobody does anything with them for all sorts of, might be economic reasons, might be political reasons, might be something else suddenly takes over. And that's, I think, the harder problem to solve. And what we love to see is where the bottom down meets the bottom up meets the top down, and that's kind of the gel that we're trying to provide, and I think that after the pandemic is also trying to provide, because if those two things can meet in the middle somewhere, then amazing things can happen.
Any more for any more? We do have another taker.
Well, I think seeing everything presented together, it's clear how the collaboration makes a lot of sense, and it's really exciting to see how it's going to be all brought together going forward. And I was just wondering about how easy is it to use Commonplace outside of the UK, if at the moment at least?
Yes, good question. So one of the aims of this is that we hope will inspire not only other cities in the UK to embark on a similar thing, but other cities around the world. And the presentation that we're doing tomorrow is to an international audience. So, what we hope will come out of it is some interest and some new energy about taking this model and running with it elsewhere. In terms of what we do already, we work internationally in North America, in New Zealand, in Europe, a few projects, and we've actually just launched we're just about to launch a massive master plan on Commonplace in Lahore in Pakistan. And one of the things that we're developing actively, and that we've developed for that project, is the ability to do multilingual projects and to be able to kind of flip between a number of different languages. And that's great for international regions and other countries, but it's actually also great for the UK, where you've got different communities. You know, in London, there's however many hundred languages that are spoken, and being able to access some of those communities with a multilingual engagement platform can be really powerful as well.
Even just on a smaller level as well. I have a colleague at One Planet called Chloe, and she was at university in Milan. And one of her classmates for his kind of final year project had been coming up with an idea very, very similar to Commonplace. And she ended up putting him in touch with me, and we've had a whole discussion about it. And I think he's asked Eleni for a job. So you know, they were bringing all of these groups together already. And it just goes to show that, you know, he's a very bright young man, you know, living and working in Milan, and he'd come up with this because he recognized the need for it already. You know, and he was trying to develop it himself and get the funding, and now he could just put all of his energies into kind of getting these things to happen more quickly. So yeah. Absolutely.
Same goes, I think, for after the pandemic as well, as we want to try and open source what we're doing. Obviously, Commonplace is an open source, but it's very open. But we want to kind of try and work out where else in the world this applies, because we have a very strong sense that it probably applies everywhere, because it's working in a city the size of Glasgow. Glasgow has a very high community spirit quotient, I think, as we've seen, like unusually high, and is notable for that. But it'd be fascinating to see how that matches against other, you know, and there's AI there, I think, to be done to interpret that data on the scale that you're developing it. But we're convinced that what we've done is replicable, and that we can. But what we're really interested in is what happens when you put it in another country or in another location, or apply it to a different, pick an industry or something, then go take that model forward, and then just sort of let it go and see what happens. So I think matching that together with the way Commonplace is going to grow is very, very interesting, because then there's this mechanism behind to actually learn what people think fast. And what's key about it is that you can be anonymous, like you can choose not to be contacted. So, and there's a very low level of trolling. In fact, no trolling at all. I don't think people don't. It's when it's their own community. I think people are like, no, I live here. I'm gonna, and there's lots of moaning. You know, there's like plenty of legitimate moaning and complaint, but that's gold for local authorities and for people with any kind, or NGOs or anybody who wants to. What you point Commonplace at, I'm very interested in, because at the moment it's quite planning and urban development based, but it works for all kinds of other things. You know, geographically, where geographical location and a felt sense of context is very important. So that links very well together with what after the pandemic are about.
Is it used in the private sector?
Yeah, it is. So we offer it for developers who are developing planning applications. And what we do for them, or what we encourage them to do, is to engage with the community in a way that they sometimes don't, by providing something that's really easy for them and that gives them really, really useful information to make their planning application better, and therefore to reduce the risks for them of planning, but doing it in a way that has the community on board rather than creates a kind of fight with the community.
And the way that you can have statistics built, something that you can, but even just the slides that you were showing there, something very purposeful, and there's nothing empty about it in that way of just like, oh, we spoke to the community. It's, you know, you have black and white statistics. Here's what people want. Here's what people don't want. Take that forward, and your builds, your business will be more successful just based on that fact. That's just a fact. And was it quite deliberate as well, just when you were saying about lack of trolling? When you did the design for Commonplace, the fact that you can't comment under people's comments and you can just do a thumbs up, because otherwise, you know, I mean, we're explaining it to somebody else and they were like, isn't that just like Facebook? And I said, no, it's the opposite. It's the opposite, because that kind of argument is actually a sort of circular waste of time.
Yeah, I could talk for a long time about how Facebook's built and the way that it kind of works, but essentially Facebook's business model is about creating adversity.
Yeah,
you know,
encourage dissent in a
yeah,
useless
because
fashion.
that's what drives traffic, and what we're trying to do is the opposite, which is to encourage constructive participation. And use that as a business model to generate traction.
Yeah, I think that's obviously from a developer's point of view, that's enormously valuable as well, because it doesn't feel or look like a developer's tool. It doesn't look like it can be white labeled as well. So I think, or to a certain extent, it's common to all its users in a kind of Facebooky way, but in a nice way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the point that you actually asked about.
Sorry.
So I actually answer your question. Yeah, well, I mean, the design was very much to make it into a constructive process. So we do, we encourage people to moan, we encourage them to vent if they need to, but then take them from that kind of point of emotion or offload to a kind of, well, what can you do about it? How can you improve it? So turn it from a kind of event into
There's a very propositional question in it. What can you do about this? In all of them is like, what is it you want to talk about? Why do you want to talk about it? What can you do to help? Which is quite sort of jabby, but you don't get that. It puts people on the back foot who are there just to have a event, which is fine because you've captured the data. But it's great, like what people have written in there is that I will get my shovel out and I will build it myself. I will knock down the trees if I need to, or I'll put the trees up. I will tend the garden. It's very fulfilling to go and read through all the comments and see what people have said they will do to help. That spirit thing is very, it's, you hear about it, but it's definitely there. There's evidence in these comments, and I think 1,200 were past the sort of representative sample number now, so we can extrapolate from that very usefully, and a lot of it's really, really good and positive.
Yeah, and very funny in
And
places.
funny,
I mean, just unbelievably hilarious.
Yeah.
I mean, I've read every single comment now, sometimes multiple times over, and we've been sharing some of the best ones. Just
how does the giant hogweed on the River Clyde make you feel? Zero.
Yeah. That's an incredible one.
Really...
And in quite broad Scots in places as well, which I feel
which
as an ex-linguist quite heartened by. There's definitely a linguistics dissertation to be written. I will not be writing it. I have too much to do, but yeah, absolutely. So it's been great. To see.
Unless there's anybody more questions, we've just about got past the hour, and watch this space, I think, is the key. We're not going to let it just sit here. We're going to do something with it.
And you'll have to share the outcomes from the green zone as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a live stream from the green zone, which I will circulate.
Please, yeah, that'd be great.
For tomorrow night.
Yeah,
make sure you mention all your friends.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks very much, both of you. It was awesome.
Pleasure.
Thank you for coming, all of you. We'll have the live stream. The live stream will live online ad infinitum. So
forever and ever and ever and ever.
Yeah.
There's lots of sweets at the back of the room. Please eat them. They're left over from last night's film screening. Yes, yeah, exactly. I'm looking at you.
Snuck in there off camera.
Get in there with that jar.
Just for the live stream people,
I love it. This is great. I mean, one of the things I've noticed as well in the union is just people sitting around and like, it's